Good evening, I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. On the NewsHour tonight, even as he dominates the Republican primary, former President Donald Trump spends millions of campaign dollars on legal fees in the many cases against him.
States across the country debate how to use the billions of dollars obtained from opioid settlements with major pharmaceutical companies.
What we want is for this money to go to help people who are struggling with opioid addiction. So the money is required to go to that purpose.
And an executive order creates new military protocols for investigating sexual assault in the armed forces.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Leonard and Norma Chlorfine, and Koo and Patricia Ewan. The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, for more than 50 years advancing ideas and supporting institutions to promote a better world at hewlett.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. Relief has finally arrived for regions of the country that have been broiling under intense heat. A cold front helped today to lower temperatures across much of the upper Midwest, the Northeast, and the Mid-Atlantic.
Temperatures are also easing slightly across the Southwest after Phoenix endured 31 straight days of highs above 110 degrees. But in California, the heat is still fueling wildfires. Crews today battled a fire burning out of control in the Mojave National Preserve. The property manager at former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate made his first court appearance today in a classified documents case. Carlos de Oliveira faces charges that he hid security footage at Mr. Trump's direction and lied to investigators. De Oliveira left the hearing in Miami without entering a plea because he hasn't found a local attorney yet. He's now free on a $100,000 bond. Hunter Biden's former business partner says then Vice President Joe Biden spoke with their associates, but never about business. Devin Archer was interviewed today by the House Oversight Committee. Afterward, Democrat Dan Goldman said Archer testified that Hunter Biden sold the illusion of access to his father. Republican Andy Biggs said the testimony justifies an impeachment inquiry. In Pakistan, the Islamic State group has claimed responsibility for Sunday's suicide bombing that killed 54 people, including 5 children, and wounded 200. It happened at a pro-Taliban election rally in the northwest near the Afghan border. Tents were still in tatters today, and upturned chairs littered the ground. Hospitals were overwhelmed, and victims' relatives clamored for answers.
I am a shopkeeper, and I was also present at the rally with my son who got injured. We lost loved ones, so many martyred in the incident. I demand that the government investigate this, because this was a brutal act. Now we don't know what will happen in the future.
The ISIS claim of responsibility gave no details. Instead, it said it's waging war on democracy as, quote, a regime hostile to true Islam. A new attempt at a ceasefire is underway in Lebanon tonight after 3 days of clashes between rival Palestinian factions at a refugee camp. At least 9 people have died. Earlier today, plumes of smoke dotted the skyline in the southern port city of Sidon as Fatah loyalists battled Islamist groups. Palestinian refugees took shelter wherever they could.
We fled because of the shelling and the bullets. It was falling on us. Too many people were killed. We cannot stay and have ourselves and our children die. We cannot stay, and we do not want those armed fighters here.
The violence erupted Saturday after a gunman tried to kill a Palestinian militant. Islamist fighters struck back Sunday, killing a Fatah military commander. Russian missiles killed 6 people and wounded 75 today in central Ukraine. The attack targeted the city of Kryvyi. It's President Volodymyr Zelensky's hometown and far from the front lines of the war. Rescue crews searched for survivors in the rubble of an apartment complex and a university building. Officials say a 10-year-old girl was among those killed. A group of 15 West African nations is imposing sanctions on Niger after the military coup there. It's also threatening military force if the country's elected president is not reinstated. At the same time, the president of neighboring Chad, Mahamat Idriss Déby, arrived in Niger on Sunday. He's meeting with both sides to try to mediate a solution. Back in this country, Wall Street started the week with a modest advance. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 100 points to close at 35,559. The Nasdaq rose 29 points. The S&P 500 added 6 and is now at a 16-month high. And actor and comedian Paul Reubens, known by millions as Pee Wee Herman, died Sunday night after a long struggle with cancer. Reubens hit it big in the 1980s with his Emmy-winning Saturday morning TV show Pee-wee's Playhouse and with 2 movies. After that, a 1991 arrest for indecent exposure put his career on hold for years. Paul Reubens was 70 years old. Still to come on the NewsHour, country music star Jason Aldean defends his new hit song that's been criticized as racist. Whistleblower testimony reignites the debate over UFOs and the possibility of alien life. American swimmer Katie Ledecky makes history again with major wins at the World Championships, plus much more.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
So far, former President Donald Trump's growing legal troubles do not appear to be putting a dent in his support among Republican voters. The latest polling shows the former president maintaining his stranglehold over the GOP, and there's scant evidence that any of his challengers will be able to loosen his grip on the nomination, even as he faces criminal charges. Former President Donald Trump is trouncing his 2024 Republican rivals, according to a new New York Times Siena College poll, holding a massive 37 percentage point lead over Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in the GOP presidential field. The results underscoring Mr. Trump's iron grip on the Republican electorate, even as he faces multiple criminal and civil legal cases.
Thank you very much, Erie.
Speaking this weekend in Pennsylvania, the former president railed against Democrats' repeated false claims of election fraud and urged Republicans to jump to his defense.
The radical lunatic Democrats, they impeach me, they indict me, they rig our elections. And the Republicans just don't fight the way they're good people, but they don't fight the way they're supposed to fight. The others are dirty, sick players, and the Republicans are very high class. They've got to be a little bit lower class.
Among Mr. Trump's rivals, different approaches for taking on the dominant frontrunner for the party's nomination. Former Congressman Will Hurd, speaking Friday before a crowd of party faithful in Iowa, tore into the former president.
Donald Trump is running to stay out of prison. And if we elect...
Which drew a chorus of boos.
I know. Listen, I know the truth. The truth is hard.
And on the airwaves, former Governor Nikki Haley encouraged Republicans to move beyond Donald Trump.
Well, none of us want to be talking about indictments. Yeah. I don't even know if it's the 3rd, 4th, or 5th indictment right now, but what I can tell you is it's a distraction.
As former governor and outspoken Trump critic Chris Christie offered this.
It is most likely that by the time we get on the debate stage on August 23rd, the frontrunner will be out on bail in 4 different jurisdictions.
But Ron DeSantis, speaking to reporters today in New Hampshire, dodged a question about Mr. Trump's legal exposure, avoiding any mentions of the former president.
We're here to talk about restoring this economy.
And for a closer look at the latest developments in the Republican primary, We're joined now by Republican pollster Whit Ayers, who has in the past consulted for Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and Senators Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio. It's great to have you here.
Good to be with you, Jeff.
The New York Times, in its analysis of that poll that we mentioned, notes that in the modern history of presidential primaries, no candidate who has led his or her nearest rival by at least 20 points at this point in the race has ever lost a party nomination. And Donald Trump leads Ron DeSantis by nearly double that. Is a Trump nomination inevitable at this point, Whit?
Far from it, Jeff. I mean, we've never in American history had a leading candidate for president facing multiple serious felony indictments either. So it's such an unstable environment with the things that haven't happened yet that might happen that we don't know about. Does Donald Trump have a huge lead in the national polls? Yes, he does. And I think it's unreasonable to expect the national polls to change before people start voting in Iowa or New Hampshire or South Carolina. But there are plenty of examples of people starting to vote and somebody popping in one of those early states, and then the national numbers follow along behind that. But I don't think the national numbers are going to change until Iowa.
Well, let me ask you then about the intensity of Donald Trump's support, noting that this, of course, is a national poll, as you say, but it finds that 43% of Republicans have a very favorable opinion of Donald Trump, a group that he carries by an overwhelming 92% to a 7% margin if he's in a one-on-one race with Ron DeSantis. How does Ron DeSantis overcome that? A 92 to 7% margin?
It would be very difficult, but Ron DeSantis may not be the one who has the best shot of doing it. Let's presume at the start that running for president is really hard. Lamar Alexander, our first presidential candidate, is used to saying that running for a statewide office and running for president is the difference between running for or playing in 8th grade basketball and the NBA finals. It's really hard. Let's also agree that no one has quite figured out how to deal with a Donald Trump full-fledged assault, not just on your character or record, which is par for the course, but on your appearance, your wife's appearance, ask Ted Cruz, presumably laying out allegations with totally unsupported about pedophilia, like he did with Ron DeSantis. No one has done that. That said, Ron DeSantis keeps making unforced error after unforced error. He said that Ukraine was just a territorial dispute, which really upset a lot of Republicans in the foreign policy world. He suggested that RFK Jr., a conspiracy theorist of the highest order, should run the Center for Disease Control. And he keeps doubling down on the argument that somehow slavery was beneficial to some slaves. I mean, those are obvious cases where going one direction was the obvious answer, and he went the other direction. That makes me wonder if he's got the political instincts to play effectively at this level.
Well, I was going to ask you that. You have the experience of having worked for Governor DeSantis during his 2018 gubernatorial bid. What seems to be the problem? Is the strategy flawed? Is the candidate flawed, or both?
He has a hard time working with people. He will have absolutely nothing to do with anyone associated with a hard-fought, successful race in 2018. Not the pollster, not either media consultant, not the general consultant, not the campaign manager, and not the financial consultant. That's a little unusual, Jeff, when you have a candidate winning and it'll have nothing to do with any of the people who helped him.
The candidates who seem to be taking on Donald Trump directly, to include Chris Christie, Will Hurd, Asa Hutchinson, is there enough of a share of the Republican electorate left for them to mount serious challenges?
We've talked before about how there is a never Trump cohort in the Republican Party, but it's only about 10 to 12%. Those messages appeal a lot to the never Trump people, but there's a majority of the party that are maybe Trump people that voted for him twice but are skeptical that he can win in 2024. The problem is when you say Donald Trump is unfit for office, that makes those people have to recognize that they've voted twice for someone who was unfit to be president. That's a hard psychological leap to get over for most of those people.
Because people don't want to believe that they were wrong.
Exactly. And so I think those three candidates you mentioned are very effective at making a never Trump argument, but I think they're going to tap out at 10 to 12% of the electorate.
Whit Ayers, always great to speak with you. I'm sure we'll have you back as this campaign unfolds.
Great to be here, Jet.
The settlement money from several companies that made, distributed, and sold opioid painkillers is starting to flow in. More than $50 billion will be paid out over the next 18 years to state and local governments across the country. But the debate around exactly how this money should be spent is just beginning. In the first of two reports, special correspondent Kat Wise and producer Mike Fritz traveled to North Carolina, where overdose deaths have spiked by more than 70% since 2019. It's part of our ongoing series, America Addicted.
In Troy, North Carolina, Crystal Weatherly's new job starts early. As a peer support specialist, her first task is often gathering up boxes of the overdose reversal drug Narcan from the Montgomery County Health Department.
Okay.
She then heads to the local jail, where she works with inmates battling addiction.
Hey, it's Crystal.
By afternoon, she's driving across this rural section of the state with her friend and volunteer Jamal Moore.
Which one, this one or that one?
Let's try this house. I
Okay.
think this is.
They talk to residents, hand out Narcan, and provide information about treatment options.
My name is Crystal. Okay, I'm a peer support specialist and I'm in the county working with folks that have addiction issues.
Home to just 25,000 people, Montgomery County's overdose death rate is nearly double that of North Carolina's statewide rate.
I'm in recovery, so I know what it's like to struggle in that way. So I'm here to help people.
After battling alcohol and drug addictions for 30 years, Weatherly says it's work that's deeply personal. She's been in recovery since 2015.
People in this community that need help are more likely to talk to me because they know that I'm in recovery and I understand what it's like to struggle and have no hope. And so that's what I want to do, is offer people hope that they don't have to live that way.
Few resources have been available to address the opioid crisis here in Montgomery County until now.
Do you know anybody that might need some Narcan?
Weatherly's job, which she began in May, and the Narcan she distributes are both funded by opioid settlement payments, now coming into North Carolina, a state that is expected to receive about $1.5 billion over the next 18 years.
People need support, and people need to know that the stigma that is typically attached to substance use is not viewed that way by everybody.
The stakes for Weatherly and others on the front lines of North Carolina's opioid epidemic are high.
The opioid crisis has been absolutely devastating. It is the deadliest drug epidemic in American history, and tragically, we're at the deadliest moment.
North Carolina's Attorney General Josh Stein led negotiations for national settlements against companies that included Johnson & Johnson, CVS, Walgreens, and several others. In all, these settlements have netted roughly $54 billion.
Is it enough money to actually make an impact?
It is absolutely enough money to make an impact. It's not enough money to end addiction, but what I am 100% certain of is that there'll be many, many more people who are alive, healthy, and happy because of these funds and the important programs they're going to fund than otherwise would be.
Stein says the goal of most of these settlements was to give states flexibility in determining how best to spend their money, but to also require them to use at least 85% of that funding on addiction treatment and prevention. Those requirements were put in place because of what happened during the 1990s, after states won more than $240 billion from cigarette companies.
We all watched what happened with the tobacco settlement, and here in North Carolina, that money just goes straight into the general fund and is used for whatever. It's not helping people who are struggling with nicotine addiction. What we want is for this money to go to help people who are struggling with opioid addiction. So the money is required to go to that purpose.
But across the nation, how those spending requirements will be enforced remains a big question, says Aneri Patani of KFF Health News. She's been tracking how opioid settlement money is being spent.
What's literally in the settlement documents is the idea that if states don't use at least 85% of their funds on the epidemic, then the companies, meaning Johnson & Johnson, AmerisourceBergen, et cetera, the companies that settled, would be the ones to sort of hold the states accountable and say, hey, you didn't meet this 85% number, we're going to take you to court and we're going to reduce our future payments to you.
So far, more than $3 billion has gone out to state and local governments. The amount of money each state will receive is based on several factors, including the percentage they contribute to the country's total number of overdose deaths, the number of people with opioid use disorder, and the total population of the state.
$50 billion is a lot of money, but you think about it being spread over 18 years and across 12 different companies, a lot of these pharmaceutical companies are bringing in profits in the tens of billions. You take Johnson & Johnson, for example, they're going to be paying out $5 billion in the opioid settlement funds in total, but they last year made profits around $95 billion. So a lot of people are looking at that and thinking, this is not that much coming from the companies.
But it's money that many hope will make a difference. In North Carolina, 85% of settlement funds will go directly to counties and the rest to the state's legislature.
To have this additional funding really is our first step towards getting our community back.
43-year-old John Shaw never imagined he'd get into politics, but last year he became a Montgomery County commissioner, in large part because of what opioids have done to his community.
In the last 5 years, personally, I've known 5 people to pass away. In this past one in January, my best friend in life, and he struggled for quite some time.
Shaw's best friend, Chris Goodwin, loved music and his community. He died from a fentanyl overdose in his home earlier this year. While Shaw hopes there will one day be enough funding to open a residential treatment facility, he's now focused on saving lives.
We haven't engaged this issue, not just here, but across this country, and it's seeped into every household in one way or another. And we've got to get proactive to provide recovery and retreatment options for those who want it.
That's why he pushed to spend Montgomery County's first settlement payments, about $70,000 so far, on more Narcan and hiring Crystal Weatherly.
Within 72 hours of an overdose, we want to have her engaging with that individual. After that experience, it's a great time to talk to somebody about possibly making different life choices.
But for those who lost loved ones to opioids, this settlement money remains largely out of reach.
Without them, we're lost. And now, without anything, we're lost.
Rita Russell has lost 2 children, her daughter Alicia and her son Whitley, to overdoses in the last 4 years. She and her son John sat down with me in Fayetteville.
There's a lot of parents that lost their children. There's children that lost their mother and fathers. I hope as a survivor, along with all the other survivors, that we get some compensation.
Yeah, there was people dying back there.
John, who is a community activist, says he was angry when he learned none of the state's money would be going to families like his. He's been traveling to settlement funding meetings across North Carolina.
A lot of times I sit there in them rooms and I'm like, I wonder how many people here have a lost one. How many individuals in this room with me have lost one? But it's a different complexity when you got somebody that, you really love die from it. You see things a lot differently.
Russell says his sister, who died in 2019, was outside a gas station when she overdosed. Those around her weren't able to help.
If she would have had Narcan, it might have helped her. So then I said, well, why don't we just normalize this and put it inside stores?
He's now hoping to apply for some of the state settlement funding for a new nonprofit that aims to help people find Narcan via an app he is developing.
Yeah, this goes for the store, so that way if anybody comes in and they have an overdose in the store, you got something to work with them with. If we're dealing with an epidemic and you're calling for individuals to step up to the plate, there's a lot of individuals that will step up to the plate that are doing things.
It's this one right down here.
For Crystal Weatherly, she knows her work is just beginning, but even the most difficult cases represent an opportunity.
I think it's critical to reach them, and that it doesn't matter to me how many times they've overdosed. There's always hope. And as long as they're still here, I see someone with potential. I see somebody that can have a different life.
A glimmer of hope, finally, for a state that is now losing more than 4,000 people to overdoses a year. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Kat Wise in Montgomery County, North Carolina.
And tomorrow night, we'll travel to Ohio, where the debate around opioid settlement money has led to a legal battle. One of the most popular country music hits of the summer is Try That in a Small Town. But the song has ignited controversy and faced backlash from fans who say the lyrics encourage racism and violence. Jeffrey Brown has more for our arts and culture series, Canvas.
The song is by Jason Aldean, one of country music's biggest stars. The video includes footage of violent protests and vandalism and was filmed in part at a courthouse in Tennessee, which was the scene of race riots in 1946 and where a black man was lynched in 1927. Critics, including singers Sheryl Crow and Margot Price, say the lyrics promote violence, with verses that include, "Try that in a small town, see how far you make it down the road, around here we take care of our own."
Got a gun that my granddad gave me. They say one day they're gonna round up. That might fly in the city. Good luck.
Following an outcry, the original video was slightly re-edited to remove some of its controversial images. Small protests have taken place at several of Aldean's concerts, but the song's popularity has only grown, jumping to #2 on Billboard's country music charts last week. Joining me now to tell us more, Marcus K. Dowling. He's the country music reporter for the Tennessean in Nashville. Thanks so much for joining us. You know, when this song was released, it wasn't that big a hit. It got more attention with the video. Why do you think it has become such a cultural flashpoint?
I'd say that there's a growing, or there has been a long existing conservative base in country music that is being positioned via this song to, you know, have a certain moment. And I feel like those fans are regular streamers now. They regularly engage with content online as well as with physical purchases too. So they're willing to support a song like this because it, you know, plays right into their demographics and ideals.
And tell us more. I mean, what are they hearing and what are they seeing?
Well, I think that they're hearing, you know, this pay on to small town values and the thought that America's at a place where it's more divergent and diverse and dynamic than ever before. So for a lot of people, it feels like, you know, maybe they're being lost in the larger conversation. And so a song like this sort of stems the tide, for lack of a better term.
Jason Aldean himself has been outspoken in his conservative views, certainly on social media. Tell us a little bit more about him and what has been his response to the outcry now.
Well, he's definitely been in support of his own song, and he's been willing to continue to play it live. And it plays with where he's been headed as a artist on social media for roughly the last 5 years. He and his wife have come out as notable conservatives, and they're willing to do that because they feel as though with the upswell of the more liberal left in country music and related spaces, that there just isn't a space to be notably conservative in that vein and to have that voice and to be willing to stand up and you know, articulate your own beliefs.
You know, as I said, there have been some small protests at concerts, but the song has only gained popularity. How is that being seen or read in the industry itself? Is it support for the views? Is it curiosity, a mix of both?
I'd say that it's a mix of everything. It's not just a mix of both. This is a very broad issue. In country music currently, you have every type and stripe of political, social, and musical background apparent in the genre in a manner that hasn't been seen in 50 years in the space. So that's everything from progressive house to hip hop, all the way through to country's Western swing and folk and blues-driven roots. The whole space is represented, and in that sense, because the whole space is represented, you know, like a song like this plays into certain parts of that realm, and everybody being seen, they're willing to be supportive as well.
Well, I want to pick up on some of what you're saying there. You know, this becomes part of a much larger cultural and political divisions in country music and in our society at large. I cited some criticisms from some leading figures in Nashville, but how strong are those divisions within country music itself?
I'd say that within country itself, you're looking at both country and Americana across the board to speak to this broader platform that I'm speaking of, in the sense that you have people who traditionally have played towards more conservative arms of the socio-political spectrum for years. There's artists like Cody Johnson and others who are Western in their background and have historically always felt to be more libertarian, for lack of a better term, in their views. So they've been willing to support. As well, you have the Margot Prices and Jason Isbells, who are more Americana-driven and more bent towards a socio-political left leaning notion in their beliefs.
You know, I mean, I know from some of my own reporting over the years that the criticisms that have hit the industry about how inclusive it is, how tolerant it is, you're saying there has been change. How much change have you seen, even in recent years?
Well, I'll say that one of the great bellwethers of this is that in the past 3 to 5 years have been 5 African-American males who have had #1 singles on country radio. As well, within the Americana ranks, there's artists like Allison Russell, who is a queer African-American female, and there's been trans artists. There's a woman named Mia Byrne, who recently played on stage at Bridgestone Arena. So again, it's a wide open space currently in these realms where artists who were traditionally marginalized are experiencing greater visibility. And when you see a song like Try That in a Small Town, it notes the fact that for as far left as country has leaned and Americana has leaned, it's also leaning far right too. So there's a balance in the democratization in the space for sure.
Okay, Marcus K. Dowling of the Tennessean in Nashville, thanks so much.
Absolutely, you're welcome, anytime.
After years of protest and advocacy, a new executive order from the Biden administration seeks to bolster the military's ability to deal with sexual assault. But how far-reaching are these changes, and will they make a difference? Laura Barone Lopez conducted this conversation earlier today.
On Friday, President Biden signed an executive order codifying changes to the military justice system over how to handle sexual assault in the ranks. Those changes were mandated by Congress last year and were supposed to usher in significant reforms that survivors and their advocates have demanded for years. For that, we turn to retired Lieutenant Colonel Rachel Van Landingham. She was an Air Force attorney and now teaches at Southwestern Law School. And Army veteran Lindsay Knapp previously served as a victim advocate in the military and is a lawyer continuing her work against sexual assault. Lindsay, I want to start with you. So this executive order creates a team of special prosecutors that are going to be called the Offices of the Special Trial Counsel. It moves some authority over sexual assault, rape, and murder cases to this new team. How significant is this executive order by the president?
Well, it certainly doesn't do what we hoped it would do. So the analogy I like to use, it's like I got my foot ran over and I got shot in the chest. And then here the military was kind enough to give me a cast for my leg, but completely ignored that I've been shot in the chest. So what we have to do is we have to hope that the service member, after they've reported this assault, that it somehow makes it to the Special Trial Counsel. But I represent a number of service members who, when they reported the sexual assault, command told them that it was consensual. So no law enforcement investigation occurred, and there would never even been an opportunity for the case to even make it to a Special Trial Counsel so they could action it. So again, so now we're talking about this chest wound that the military is just pretending doesn't exist. And then once we do get it to the Special Trial Counsel, then the commander has all of these other things that they can do, right? They can decide whether or not witnesses can or cannot be made available. And that's really, really important. because that commander's decision is final. And so the commander can decide that this person is too mission critical to testify, and we're not going to pull them out of wherever he or she is at in order to prosecute this very, very serious crime. Now, there are millions of service members serving today, and there's no one human that is irreplaceable, because if they were, then they wouldn't be sending us essentially to die, right? As a veteran myself, that's what they trained me to do. They trained me to be replaceable. So the idea that we can't make these witnesses available, or that the commander has this authority to stop that, is just wild to me.
Rachel, how significant, how seismic of a change do you think this is for the Military Justice Code?
Well, the actual changes that Congress mandated at the end of 2021 to remove a specific number of crimes from the commander's purview, where they've been since before the founding of this country, to independent military lawyers, actually is the largest seismic shift since the creation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice in 1950. However, it's a half measure that leaves in place a very broken system. It still leaves in place a commander-run system. There are no standing courts like in federal court or like downtown Los Angeles, where I am. They are pop-up courts that a commander, even if a special trial counsel sends a charge, a sexual assault charge, for example, to trial, a commander is still the one convening the court. A commander is still the one picking the jurors. And that's really something I want to talk about. Congress mandated just last year that jury selection be randomized. This new implementing instruction is problematic because it still leaves with commanders the authority to pick the universe of these jurors, and then they send a list of hand-selected jurors to a judge to quote-unquote randomize. That's not randomization, that's superficial window dressing.
But Lindsay, under the executive order, will these independent lawyers within this office of the special trial counsel still be influenced at all by commanders?
In my view, absolutely, because what we see is that folks in the military, like these attorneys, they're going to be rotating to different career assignments. So the idea that they're not going to be vying for maybe a special career assignment, maybe working for that commander in a special unit or in special operations, or in a place that might be very favorable to them, we can't imagine that attorney is not going to be thinking about that while they're trying to zealously prosecute these offenses. And that's a problem that we currently see now, right? So that these junior attorneys and even some of these senior attorneys, they are still trying to get promoted. They're still going to be advising a commander, and they're hoping to maybe advise a commander to 2, 3, or 4-star level. All of those commanders at all of those levels have attorneys advising them, and those attorneys want those jobs. And so how zealously are they going to prosecute sexual assault cases when they're thinking about that in the back of their mind, if that's a commander that they may be making an adverse ruling towards? So that's a huge concern for us.
Rachel, on what more the White House could potentially do with the powers that Congress afforded to it, I should note that Senator Kirsten Gillibrand's office told us that, they're very pleased with this executive order, that they are going to be monitoring the implementation closely, and that if they think that further reforms are needed, they are going to be really pushing for those. But do you think that the president has more authority based on what Congress gave him that he didn't use here?
Yes. So, for example, the president has a maneuver room for ordering pretrial confinement. Right now, the new implementing regulations leave it vested in commanders. But the president can decide who qualifies as a commander. They could have a military magistrate, someone that's more independent and impartial from the chain of command, making the decisions regarding confinement, just like judges do in the federal civilian arena. And I did mention that I thought this was a seismic change that doesn't go far enough. The reason it's a seismic change, because it's the first time in over 200 years in this country in which commanders have actually lost a little bit of power. It's a huge admission that the system doesn't work, but it's a half step. It's a half step because if commanders cannot be trusted to make a decision regarding whether murder should be prosecuted, sexual assault should be prosecuted, or manslaughter, which are now going to independent military lawyers, why do commanders have authority over any offenses including capital offenses? And I would like to highlight what Lindsay said and reiterate that commanders still own this system. What was the most disappointing component of the hundreds of pages that were released on Friday is one line. That one line says, oh, by the way, commanders, despite the fact that the Special Trial Counsel has exclusive authority over covered offenses, if you, any commander, feel that there will be a detrimental impact on national security or the prosecution of a war, you're to go via FAR Direct to the secretary concerned and state your concerns. There's already a formal process to give those concerns. Instead, this just seems like a tangible symbol that, hey, by the way, everybody, this is a reminder, commanders are still in charge here. And it doesn't matter if a special trial counsel decided to prosecute, they can go around them. And that's actually in the regulation that was not mandated by Congress. And that clearly shows where the Pentagon's head is.
And Lindsay, lastly, I do want to ask you, you represent as well sexual assault victims. And do they see any hope in these actions that were taken by Congress and the White House?
I mean, a lot of them are cautiously optimistic, but they're experiencing retaliation in real time, right? And so the military is reporting that 64% of all service members are being retaliated against after they report a sexual assault, and they are in that group. And so I'm not quite sure how a special trial counsel is going to help them from the retaliation that they're experiencing now to get their report to law enforcement to have it adjudicated properly.
That's retired Lieutenant Colonel Rachel Van Landingham and Army veteran Lindsay Knapp. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Laura.
Just before air tonight, we received this statement from a White House official disagreeing with our guests' conclusions. It reads, for cases of sexual assault, rape, or other covered offenses for which the Special Trial Counsel has decided to proceed with prosecution, commanders no longer have any authority over that case, and determinations made by Special Trial Counsel are binding. This pertains to all phases of a case, including adjudication, sentencing, and also pretrial confinement matters. Commanders also do not have any control over producing witnesses in these cases. The White House official added that commanders have no ability to hold up a trial on the basis of national security concerns. The NewsHour will continue to report on this topic. Are we alone in the universe? One former Pentagon employee told Congress last week that the truth is out there and it's being hidden from the American people. Former intelligence officer David Grush says he worked on classified military programs and that UFOs are real, and the government, he says, has been withholding knowledge of non-human life on Earth for nearly a century. Meantime, NASA is set to release its own report on UFOs in the next few weeks. Here to help us separate fact from science fiction is journalist Garrett Graff, whose forthcoming book is UFO, the inside story of the U.S. government's search for alien life here and out there. Thanks for being with us, Garrett.
Always a pleasure.
One of the reasons why this congressional hearing resonated with so many people, and one of the reasons why we're still talking about it, is because that former Air Force intelligence officer told Congress that the U.S. government has a long-standing program that retrieves UFOs, and he also said that, quote, non-human biologics have been found at crash sites.
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries, yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
So, based on your own reporting and research, what should we make of that assertion? And does non-human mean alien?
I think in this case, that's what David Grush intends it to mean. I think the challenge is we don't have anyone saying that they have firsthand knowledge of these finds. In that sense, David Grush actually fits into a long tradition dating back into the 1970s and 1980s of these sort of so-called UFO whistleblowers who come forward with what the UFO community calls FOF tales. Not folk tales, but FOF tales, friend of a friend tales, who say sort of, this is what I've heard, I don't have firsthand knowledge.
Well, to your point, I mean, for decades, the discussion around UFOs had been sort of characterized by stereotypes of people in tinfoil hats. But here you have veteran pilots, former intelligence officials, people who, by all appearances, are credible. Is what they're saying also credible and reliable?
Yes, and I think that this is part of a very historic change that we have seen since 2017 when there were new revelations around the Pentagon's engagement on what used to be called UFOs that the government now calls UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomenon. And you now have serious people saying, as these two Navy fighter pilots, naval aviators said in their hearing last week, there are technologies out there that we are encountering that we cannot explain and that are better than anything that we think our government possesses.
When did the U.S. government start tracking UFOs or UAPs? And help us understand how this discussion has sort of fallen into public view, because for a long time, lawmakers and officials weren't willing to talk about this.
Yeah. The modern era of UFOs really started right after World War II. 1947 was the beginning of what you might call the flying saucer era in terms of people spotting things in the sky that they thought were extraterrestrial. And from the 1940s until the late 1960s, early 1970s, the US government had a very active UFO sort of search and study program. But that was shut down, and for about 50 years, the Pentagon disavowed any knowledge that it had a meaningful UFO program until around 2017, when you began to see this modern resurgence and this sort of new era where people are grappling with the reality, the demonstrated clear reality that there are technologies out there that our military is encountering that they cannot explain.
Well, I was going to ask you how most UFO encounters are explained, but I hear you say that there's a good portion of them that aren't.
Yeah, and some of the government's renaming of this from UFOs to UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon, anomalous phenomenon, is to try to capture the idea that some of this are probably not objects, that some of this, it might be atmospheric, meteorological, astronomical phenomenon that we don't understand. But some chunk of it is certainly advanced aerial technologies being tested by adversaries like China, Russia, and Iran. One of the things that the Pentagon has said that its UAP program has discovered is a heretofore unknown Chinese transmedium drone. That is a Chinese craft that comes out of the water and transitions to flight.
The U.S. government has long been accused of hiding what it knows about UFOs or UAPs. In fact, at that congressional hearing, there was one Republican member who said that the government's lack of transparency surrounding UAPs amounts to a cover-up. That was the phrase that he used. Based on your reporting, is there evidence of a coordinated government cover-up?
Well, the government certainly covers up some aspects of this, what its sensors can pick up. Some chunk of this is surely our own advanced technologies being tested, stealth craft, et cetera. But I think actually, this is what I sort of tried to trace in the book, is over the last 75 years, a lot of this has been, I think, a cover-up of ignorance, not of knowledge, which is to say, that this is the fact that the government is uncomfortable saying there's stuff out there and we don't know what it all is.
As we wrap up our conversation, I want to try to answer the question we posited in the opening. So far as we know, only Earth can sustain and host life. Is there life on other planets?
The last 25 years of science, the last decade of science, leads to the almost inescapable conclusion that there is probably not just life out there, but probably intelligent life. The math is really on the side of extraterrestrial civilizations out there. The challenge is any of it close enough that we will ever notice it?
Garrett Graff, looking forward to reading your forthcoming book on this topic. Thanks so much for being with us.
Always a pleasure.
Katie Ledecky is already considered the greatest swimmer of this decade. This weekend, she made her claim for the greatest of all time, notching 2 new records at the 2023 World Championships. In Japan, Ledecky surpassed Michael Phelps for the most individual titles in swimming history with 16. She also became the first swimmer ever to win 6 world titles at the same event. Christine Brennan is a sports columnist for USA Today. She's covered Ledecky for years. She joins us now. Christine, always good to see you. In your USA Today piece, you wrote, even by her own ridiculously high standards, Ledecky outdid herself. How did she do that?
Absolutely, Amna. Well, first of all, you just heard one of the wonderful things about Katie Ledecky as a role model and American hero, and that is I think she's the most self-effacing superstar in American sports, and maybe even worldwide, deflecting, saying she wasn't even aware that she was about to break this record. But Katie Ledecky is getting faster as she's getting older. She's 26. She'll be 27 next year for the Paris Olympics. And she is swimming faster now than she did 2 years ago at the Tokyo Olympics. And she's really coming closer to the times that she swam in 2016 at the Rio Olympics, when she was the breakout star there. And so now I'm sure many people will hear that and say, well, swimming, you remember the East Germans, of course, the issues of doping in the sport. Katie is a stickler. She absolutely believes in clean sport and asks to be drug tested. And one of my favorite anecdotes about Katie is that she literally will text the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency or go on the app if she's going to the grocery store, on the off chance that during that 15 minutes, a tester might come for a random knock on the door drug test. That is how serious Katie is about clean sport and about proving that she is doing this the right way.
Christine, you mentioned she's getting faster. You noted in your piece, too, some of those times. In the 800 meters, she shaved at least 4 seconds off her time from 2 years ago. In the 1500, she shaved over 10 seconds off her time. How is she doing that? What's she doing differently?
The big change is that she has moved from her training base when she went to Stanford and got her degree there. She's moved to the University of Florida, and she is training with men. She has gone to the stable of male distance swimming in the United States. The best distance swimmers in the country, the men, are at the University of Florida training for an Olympic gold medalist, now coach Anthony Nesty. And so Katie is competing against the boys. Every day she's going up against those men, and she is testing herself in a way that really I have never heard of a top female swimmer at this stage of her career has. She's doing it, and she is seeing the results.
I don't know if you can answer this briefly, but what do you think about this debate about the greatest of all time? Is she the GOAT?
Certainly Michael Phelps is right up there, and his Olympic marks are probably not going to be matched. But Katie, in terms of world championships and in terms of longevity, and we've seen swimmers at shorter distances go into their 30s. But for a woman now 26 to be 27 next year at the Olympics, to be dominating at the longer distances, the longest distances, 800 meters, 1,500 meters, that's extraordinary. And so I put her right up there.
So I got to ask you before we let you go, Christine, about the U.S. women's national soccer team. They're vying for another World Cup title right now in Australia and New Zealand. The next game is either late tonight or early tomorrow, depending on how you look at time. And your sleeping patterns is 3 a.m. Eastern. They take on Portugal. What is at stake for this team?
Everything. The U.S. team has never, ever gotten knocked out in the group stage. And this is what that is. It's the final of the group stage games. The U.S. team is won 4 of the 8 World Cups. They are the most dominant. They're the Johnny Appleseeds, sowing the seeds for the sport and fighting for equal pay. Everyone looks up to the U.S. team. So they've got to play better than they played in the first 2 matches. I think they will. Portugal's ranked 21st in the world. The U.S. is ranked 1st in the world. But the pressure is on the United States. If they were to be defeated, if they bow out, my goodness, it would be a huge story and such a disappointment, especially as people think they're going to go all the way, or at least be competing to get to, say, the semifinals. They've never, ever not gotten to the semifinals. They've never even finished 4th in a World Cup. So that's the pressure that this younger team with 14 new faces out of 23 players, that's the pressure that they're facing in a few hours. I think they'll rise to the challenge on that, but it's going to be very interesting to see if they can pull it off, because Portugal has played well, and the U.S. so far really hasn't found footing. And I think we'll see if they can do that this time.
They've got millions cheering for them while they do. Christine Brennan, sports columnist for USA Today. Always good to see you. Thank you.
You too. Thank you.
And that is the NewsHour for tonight. It's great to have you back.
Great to be back.
I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Nawaz. On behalf of the entire NewsHour team, thank you for joining us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
architect, beekeeper, mentor. A Raymond James financial advisor tailors advice to help you live your life. Life well planned.
the Kendeda Fund, committed to advancing restorative justice and meaningful work through investments in transformative leaders and ideas. More at KendedaFund.org. Supported by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information at macfound.org. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.